Welcome back, everybody. So, we are now in the process of putting his lower end back together. We ended up reusing the Eagle crank. It got rebalanced. It was very far off balance. We'll just put it that way. A long ways. But that's all good to go. So we are going to be measuring bearing clearances here and everything. We didn't pop the pistons out of the bore or anything. Everything looks awesome as far as the ring, piston cylinder wall. So we're just putting new rod and main bearings in it. We're going to measure everything out and take you along for the ride. So he's working on cleaning that up. We cleaned all this out, scrubbed all the galleys, brake cleaner, air, blew everything out. So we're pretty confident that any smidgens of the super fine little, graphite looking material that we had in the motor before, if you guys watched the old videos, you saw it was super fine and not even that much of it. I mean, the oil sample said it was probably okay.
It's not completely brake cleared out.
All right, so crank's all cleaned off. Cool. So the girdle and the block is all cleaned off. You want to get it extremely clean. Nothing there.
Oh,
We like...
that was close.
We use brake cleaners.
Right in the eyeball.
Cleaner. And coffee filters actually work awesome for everything you're doing to assemble a motor.
Oh, boy,
They don't really leave fuzzies behind. So brake cleaner, coffee filter, let it dry, blow it off, and look real close. Make sure there's nothing there. Same thing with the bearings. Clean the bearings off, the back sides. You want it completely dry. You don't want goo from the way they are in the package on the back.
Oiled.
Yep, get it all clean and dry.
Oh, nice finger oil on there. But...
So you can see every single bearing he's cleaning off and then drying it off before we set it in.
Crab gloves on. But I think they look good.
It's using a phone's weird, but all right, we're gonna get these bearings set in here. So the girdle, I'm sorry about the phone here. The girdle is torqued in the block with the bearings in, as if the crank was in there. When this crank came back to the machine shop after the balance and polish, we already measured all the journals. I looked at what we just had written down. The mains across are exactly the same within the spec that we can do with this dial caliper, which is as close as we're gonna be able to do it. So we're gonna zero it now to one of the journals on the mains, the dial caliper, and then we're gonna put it in the vise locked down, and then we will zero my bore gauge to it, and then run the bore gauge down the mains in the block to find the exact real oil clearance. So he's gonna work on getting that zeroed here. Once he has it zeroed, I'll show it in the vise. Now I can do it. Okay, so we zeroed the micrometer to the crank, took the measurement, it matched what I measured before. Then you take your bore gauge, find the correct size, spacer, whatever you need, where it will measure in the main bearing. You then put it in here and zero it to it.
Oh, we gotta.
Yeah, we haven't zeroed this one yet, so it's gonna be off.
There, yeah.
So then you do that, and then as you rock it back and forth ever so slight, you hold it tight against the pivot point of it, not the measuring side. And then you rock it a little back and forth, and you see how it goes so far?
Oh, I fell off.
You slipped
Hold up.
off.
Yep.
It's not the easiest thing in the world to do.
I'm learning.
And then
all
as you
this,
move
yeah.
it back and forth, you'll see the needle go so far and then it comes back the other way. So you need to adjust this cover till that reads 0. So as you go back and forth, the highest it ever hits is 0. Then you know you're zeroed. And that tells you that is the crank's diameter you're zeroed to. Then you put it in the block and measure it and see what the difference is. And then that tells you what the oil clearance is. So we're gonna zero this quick and then we'll show you what happens in the block. Do it real quick, show you. Okay, so now I'll show you here. Put it in. I'm gonna hold up on the side that doesn't move around. Can you see the gauge?
Yep.
Okay, so now you look at the gauge move here. It'll come so far and then it eventually stops. See how it maxes.
Okay.
Where it maxes out there, that is your oil clearance. That is the tightest point. So then you record that down, convert it to inches if you got a millimeter one like I do. If you got an inch one already, it's easier. And then that will tell you your oil clearance. That's the tightest that it is there. And you do that all the way across the whole way for every single journal. It takes a whole bunch of time, but that tells you your exact clearance. No plasti gauge, it's good enough or not good enough. This tells you exactly what it is, because sometimes we'll move bearing shells around because they're not all exact to get it 100% perfect across the way. So now we're gonna do all the rest of this, which takes a whole bunch of time here, but I just wanted to show you how we do it on this. This is gonna be a pain to edit since I started on GoPro, now I'm on phone. All these different clips, oh boy.
I'm gonna get a GoPro this year too.
I'm sorry guys if this ends up being a mess, like it's gonna be a pain. But, so, all the bearing clearances are all checked out. We, replastied the main just to be sure. Mains looked awesome. We already knew, we actually measured them to be precise, but we just do it to be sure. So now he is doing the final clean on the crank, which I already showed you, early on, everything that we do to clean it out, get it right. So now we're gonna actually torque it down in there. Same sequence that you've already done. If you've done all the measurements like we have, you've done this already a few times. No big deal. You just put assembly lube in this time. I am going to show one thing that only pertains to the split thrust 7 bolts, 98, 99 and up. When the crank is in here and the thrust washers are, I will show you how we preload the girdle, because it actually matters a little bit on these that aren't the saddle thrust, the ones that have the half moon. Here, I'll show you. These are for the split thrust blocks, the late 7 bolts. These are like the Evo. The early ones, these are actually part of the bearing. On the late ones, they're separate. And there is a way to do this to preload them correctly to make sure they're seated in the block. If they're not, you can have problems. You can crank walk a split thrust. We'll show you. Essentially, it involves hitting the crank one way, prying it forward, and then torquing it pried, and then you hit it back with more force than you would think, and then put the dial indicator on the end and pry it back and forth and measure it. We'll show you. If I remember right off the bat, I think it's 3 to 7 thousandths. Don't hold me to that. We'll get there probably in the next clip, but I will show you. I'm going to show that because I've seen that before, that people don't know that. So hang in there. So I'm going to show this part here. Everything's in assembly lube. After all, the bearing clearances are checked already good. So I set up my indicator right there, put it in, and this is, it's not torqued yet. It's just put in, snugged up with a ratchet, not even 20 foot-pounds. So either hit it with a hammer or pry it. Here's what I do. I will, I'm trying to show it myself here. I will pry the crank all the way to one side, usually the back side. So it's off the thrust. Shows 0. I've got it zeroed. Then I will pry it forward, which would be on a 6-shift car as if the clutch was pushed in, essentially. Look at what it's at. We're at essentially 4 thousandths right now. So now I will put the pry bar in there, put a little force on it, leave it pried forward, and torque the girdle forward. Then once it's torqued, which is 20, 40, 60 on the ARPs, I will then hit the crank backward with a dead blow and pry it back and forth. And I should get about the same reading. If I am too tight, the thrust washers are not seated correctly. If I'm too loose, well, you have a cranker block issue. I'm sorry. So, but I always do this. I check it first snugged up, make sure it's a sanity check right, then pry it forward, and then he'll start clicking them down now. So we're gonna go through the sequence and click it down, and then I will show you torqued that it's gonna end up exactly the same. All right, so we're battling all the troubles. Now my phone started to die, so I couldn't finish recording it. So where you last saw was I was zeroing this out. So now it's zeroed. Push it forward, pull it off. About 4 thousandths. Essentially exactly where I started with. So remember, we put it in hand tight, went back and forth, measured it, beat the crank back, pushed it forward, torqued it to spec. Then after it was torqued, beat it back, pushed it forward again. Got the same result. That is how you know that your thrust washers are actually correctly aligned. If you don't do that, you could theoretically have them not seated tight in the block, and then it will prematurely wear them. So I just wanted to show that. I haven't seen a lot about that online, and this is something I've been doing for a ton of years now that correctly seats them. I just always put everything in after the bearing clinches are done, beat it back, push it forward, measure it snugged up, torque it to spec, pushed forward towards the timing side, then beat it back again, measure it again, and if I get the same within spec, I know we're good. So that's how I do that. Oh, we got music playing. Sorry guys, it's late on a work night for me, but can't stop at this point now. So I already explained to you earlier how to check the rods, same as the mains. We're gonna plasti them now, the same as we always do at the end. It's redundant, but we just do it. So we've got them slipped up in here. He's getting ready over there. Put a strip of plasti across 1 and 4. We're gonna torque it like as if it was assembled, peel the caps off, look at it, just for reassurance. Checks out good, awesome, and we do the same with 2 and 3. At this point, this is redundancy. Plastic gauge, you know, is awesome. You use it for assembling motors. I'll use it on, you know, if somebody's got a old school small block Chevy that's all stock, just plasti it and send it. But I know motors like these, like this motor's gonna rev to 9K and make, you know, 8 horse plus per cubic inch at the crank. We just go a little more in depth with how we measure the oil clearances, and the plasti is just the last step, just to be 100% certain. So we're gonna get these rods plastied out here and double checked, and everything checks good. We'll crank them down, and the lower end rotating assembly will be put together. Just wanted to jump in and add this real quick. When you do the rod bolts, you use the assembly lube. These mainly is from the sheet. It's regular ARP lube. They have their spec, and these rods were stretched before when we put them all together. So what you want to do is actually use a stretch gauge and find how much stretch, because there's a torque range. These were stretched before, so I know where they need to be stretched at now. So we're duplicating what it was before, where it needs to be at. But you assembly lube the threads and the bottom head of the bolt itself, the built-in washer on the head. Lube there and the threads. You could theoretically torque them to the range they have, but we actually stretch them. So those were stretched to device before, found the sweet spot. I know they're gonna be the same again, so we're gonna stretch them back to where they were. All right, all done. Rods are all put in, everything's good to go. So,
Again?
yeah, again.
Yeah.
Yep. Everything moves by hand like it should be. We had the sheet over here from the first time we built it before it had the problems, and that was on 5/8 of 21. Now it's 12/14 of 22.
What was it? 12 volt December?
No, it was 5/8 of 21 the first time. So that was like close to May? Yeah, it was May. Beginning of May, so
Oh yeah.
we're much more ahead this year. But so bottom end's put together. The swap is ongoing. His head is currently at the machine shop getting the Uber leaky valve issue resolved. Yeah, that's something else we didn't talk about yet, but you'll see that when that comes back. There's some changes going on in the head department too. But for now, thanks for watching. The project is ongoing.
Yeah.